The scent of antiseptic and stale coffee was the smell of anonymity. Evelyn Hayes liked it that way. She moved through the bustling corridors of Metropolitan General with a practiced quietness, a ghost in blue scrubs. Her movements were efficient, her expression placid, her presence deliberately forgettable. She changed IV bags, recorded vitals, and answered call bells with a patience that bordered on penance. To the other staff, she was just Nurse Hayes, competent, reliable. A bit of a blank slate. Hired 6 months ago, she did her job, kept to herself, and never, ever made waves. Hayes, coffee. Black. The command came from Dr. Marcus Thorne, Chief of General Surgery, a man who wore his arrogance like a tailored suit. He didn't look up from the chart he was scribbling on, his expensive pen scratching with aggressive authority. "Of course, Dr. Thorne," Evelyn replied, her voice soft, devoid of the steel it once held. She turned toward the break room, her face a mask of compliance. A pair of junior residents snickered as she walked away. "Thorne's got her trained," one whispered. "She's just happy to have a job," the other replied. "Heard she was a nursing assistant before this. Took her forever to get her RN." Evelyn heard them. She always heard everything. It was a habit forged in places where the slightest missed sound could mean the difference between life and a body bag. She simply added the sting of their words to the quiet, cold pyre inside her and kept walking. The break room was empty. She stared at her reflection in the dark screen of the coffee maker. The woman looking back was a stranger. Her blonde hair, once ruthlessly scraped into a military bun, was now a soft, shoulder-length curtain. Her eyes, once sharp enough to cut diamonds, were deliberately muted, shadowed by a past she was desperate to outrun. She was Dr. Evelyn Reed, or she had been. She had held the rank of lieutenant commander in the Navy. She had been the Ghost, the legendary trauma surgeon attached to DevGru, the go-to specialist for when America's most elite soldiers were torn apart in the world's most dangerous corners. She had performed emergency thoracotomies in the back of shaking helicopters and reconstructed faces by the light of a single headlamp. Now, she poured coffee for a man who thought a difficult appendectomy was a high-stakes operation. It was a bitter irony, one she swallowed down every single day. But it was safe. Anonymity was a fortress. Here, she was just Nurse Hayes. No one died on her table because she no longer had a table. No one's life depended on her split-second decisions. The ghosts of her past couldn't find her here. She hoped. She returned with the coffee, placing it on the edge of Thorne's desk without a word. He grunted, a sound of dismissal. "Did you check on the post-op in 304? His pressure was a little soft." "It was," Evelyn said, her voice still quiet. "I adjusted his saline drip rate and notified the resident. His pressure is now 120/80. Thorne glanced up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to have already handled it. He expected nurses to report problems, not anticipate and address them. He quickly masked his surprise with another layer of condescension. "Good. You managed to follow basic protocol. Don't let it go to your head." Evelyn simply nodded and turned to leave. His words were gnats, annoying but harmless. They couldn't touch the armor she had built around herself. She had endured far worse from men far more dangerous than Marcus Thorne. Her shift was a blur of routine tasks, bedpans and paperwork. The mundane rhythm was a balm, a deliberate counterpoint to the chaotic symphony of trauma she had once conducted. She was checking the inventory in a supply closet when the sound began. A low, deep thumping. It was a sound that vibrated not in her ears, but in her bones. A sound she knew as well as her own heartbeat. The rhythmic chop of rotor blades, not the gentle whir of a civilian medevac. This was heavier, deeper, military. Her blood ran cold. She stepped out of the closet. Down the hall, other nurses and doctors were peering out the windows, their faces a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "What is that?" a resident asked. "Sounds like a war movie." Evelyn didn't need to look. She knew the sound of a UH-60 Black Hawk. They had no business being here, at a civilian hospital in the heart of the city. Unless they were carrying someone who couldn't go anywhere else. Her heart began a frantic, panicked beat against her ribs. No, not here. The overhead speakers crackled to life. Code Black. All surgical staff to the ER. All surgical staff to the ER. ETA 2 minutes. The hallway erupted into controlled chaos. Doctors and nurses moved with purpose. Evelyn felt a magnetic pull toward the emergency bay, a primal instinct she fought to suppress. Stay anonymous. Stay safe. Be Nurse Hayes. But her feet were already moving, carrying her toward the sound of the approaching helicopter, toward the life she had tried to bury. She reached the ambulance bay just as the Black Hawk descended, its downdraft whipping trash and leaves into a frenzy. It didn't land. It hovered, 10 feet off the ground, a menacing black silhouette against the gray sky. 2 men in tactical gear rappelled down, followed by a stretcher, swaying precariously. This wasn't a standard medical transport. This was an exfiltration. Dr. Thorne was already there, his face a mask of irritation at the breach of his well-ordered domain. "What the hell is this? We weren't notified," he yelled over the rotor wash. A grim-faced man in a flight suit landed on the tarmac and ran toward him. "No time. We've got a GSW, multiple frag, unstable. He needs a level 1 trauma center, and you're the closest." The stretcher hit the pavement, and the ER team swarmed it. Evelyn hung back, hiding in the doorway, her knuckles white where she gripped the frame. She just needed a glimpse, just to confirm it wasn't someone she knew. They wheeled the gurney inside, a whirlwind of shouted vitals and frantic activity. "Pressure 60 over palp. Tachycardic at 150. He's hemorrhaging everywhere." Evelyn saw the patient. He was a mountain of a man, even in his broken state. His face was a mess of blood and dirt, his body riddled with the kind of devastating injuries that spoke of high explosives and close-quarters combat. An IED. She recognized the pattern of wounds instantly. The deep, penetrating shrapnel. The telltale blast burns. Her breath hitched. She had seen these injuries 1,000 times. She had treated them under fire, in the dark, with half the equipment she saw arrayed here. Thorne took charge, his voice booming. "Get him into Trauma 1. Massive transfusion protocol now. I want 4 units of O- on the warmer, and 4 FFP. Page cardio, page ortho. Get me a full team. Let's get a chest tube in, stat." His orders were textbook. They were also wrong. Evelyn's mind, the surgeon's mind, she kept locked away, was racing. The patient's distended neck veins, the muffled heart sounds she could practically hear from across the room, the paradoxical pulse. It wasn't just blood loss. It was an obstructive shock. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She stepped forward, out of the shadows. He was barking orders at a resident and didn't hear her. "Dr. Thorne," she said again, louder this time. He spun around, his face furious. "What is it, Hayes? Can't you see we're busy? Go get some gauze or something." "It's not his lungs," she said, her voice flat and certain. "The chest tube is a waste of time. It's cardiac tamponade. The blast wave bruised his pericardium, and now it's filling with blood." The entire trauma bay seemed to fall silent. Every eye turned to her. The quiet, mousy nurse was contradicting the chief of surgery in the middle of a code black. Thorne's face went from red to a dangerous shade of purple. "Nurse Hayes," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "I didn't ask for a diagnosis from the nursing staff. Are you a doctor now?" "No," she said, "not anymore." "Then get the hell out of my trauma bay before I have you fired." It was a direct order. The old Evelyn, Nurse Hayes, would have scurried away, mortified. But the man on the table was gasping, his skin turning a waxy, cyanotic blue. The monitor screamed a flat, continuous tone. He was coding. Thorne yelled, "Starting compressions! Get me a crash cart! One of EPI." As a young nurse fumbled with the defibrillator pads, the dying soldier's eyes fluttered open. They were wild with pain and fear, but they scanned the room, searching. They passed over the frantic doctors, the panicked nurses, and then they found her. Recognition dawned. A bloody hand lifted weakly from the gurney, reaching for her. A single word, rasped through a throat full of blood, cut through the noise of the room. Ghost. Every person in the room froze. Thorne stopped mid-compression. The nurse with the paddles stared, dumbfounded. The soldier's eyes were locked on Evelyn. "Ghost," he repeated, a little stronger. "It's you. Thank God." Thorne looked from the dying Navy SEAL to the quiet nurse, his mind unable to bridge the gap. "What did he call you? What's going on?" Evelyn didn't answer him. She walked to the gurney, her every step now filled with a purpose that had been absent for months. She took the soldier's hand. His pulse was thready, a butterfly's wing against her fingertips. "Jake?" she said, her voice now clear and resonant, stripped of its meekness. "Jake Collins, can you hear me?" "Doc," he breathed, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. "Knew you'd find me." His eyes rolled back into his head. The monitor flatlined again. "He's gone," a resident said, defeated. "No, he's not," Evelyn snapped. The words hung in the air, a declaration of war against death itself. She turned to Thorne, her eyes blazing with an intensity he had never seen. They were the eyes of a commander. "He has minutes, if that. Your compressions are useless. You're just pushing more blood into the pericardial sac and squeezing his heart to a standstill. I need a scalpel, a betadine solution, and a thoracotomy tray. Now." Not a request, an order. Thorne was paralyzed by shock. "A thoracotomy? Here? In the ER? That's insane. We don't do that. It's a butcher's move. The protocol is to get him to an OR." "He won't make it to the elevator," Evelyn said, her voice dangerously calm. "This isn't a car crash victim, doctor. This is a Tier 1 operator hit with a 15-pound IED. The rulebook you're quoting was written for a different world. In my world, we do what it takes to keep them alive." She looked at the stunned surgical tech. "Scalpel." The tech, a young woman named Maria, looked at Thorne for confirmation. Thorne was still sputtering. "I am the chief of surgery in this hospital. You will not—" "There's no time for this!" Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. She strode to the instrument tray, grabbed a 10-blade scalpel herself, and turned back to the patient. "Someone get that betadine on his chest," she commanded. The entire room was a tableau of disbelief. The chief of surgery was being usurped by a nurse, but the authority radiating from her was absolute. It was the ingrained authority of someone who had held life and death in her hands 1,000 times. A resident, galvanized by her certainty, grabbed a bottle and began swabbing Jake's chest. "Thorne," Evelyn said, not looking at him, her focus entirely on the patient. "You can either help me, or you can get out of my way. But I am not letting him die on this table." She didn't wait for an answer. With a swift, practiced motion that bespoke thousands of hours of surgical practice, she made a long, curving incision from his sternum to his back, following the line of the 5th intercostal space. A collective gasp went through the room. Blood welled up instantly. "Rib spreaders," she barked. Maria, the tech, finally broke her paralysis and slapped the instrument into Evelyn's outstretched hand. Thorne watched, his face ashen, as this nurse, this quiet, unassuming woman, cracked open a man's chest with the confidence of a master craftsman. "She's done this before," someone whispered in awe. Evelyn inserted the spreaders and cranked them open. revealing the thoracic cavity. The sight was grim. The left lung was collapsed, and the pericardial sac surrounding the heart was a grotesque, swollen, deep purple. It was stretched taut, bulging with trapped blood, barely quivering. Just as I thought, Evelyn muttered. Massive tamponade. She held out her hand again. Forceps and scissors. She worked with a speed and precision that was inhuman. She nicked the pericardium. A jet of dark, venous blood shot out, splattering her face and scrubs. She ignored it, widening the incision. A flood of blood and clots spilled out into the chest cavity. "Suction!" she yelled. "I need to see the heart." A nurse scrambled to get the suction tube into the cavity. As the blood was cleared away, the heart, which had been crushed and motionless, gave a weak, tentative flicker. Then another. On the monitor, the flat line jagged upwards into a slow, weak sinus rhythm. A wave of relief and utter astonishment washed over the room. They were witnessing a miracle, a resurrection performed with a scalpel and sheer force of will. "Heartbeat is back," a resident breathed, staring at the monitor. 60 beats per minute. Evelyn wasn't celebrating. She was still working, her hands a blur inside the man's chest. Found it. Shrapnel tear in the right atrium. Small, but it's where the bleeding is coming from. I need a 3-0 proline suture. Thorne, who had been standing by like a statue, finally moved. He stepped forward, his eyes wide with a respect so profound it bordered on fear. "Let me," he said, his voice husky. "Let me help." Evelyn glanced at him, her gaze sharp. She saw the arrogance stripped away, replaced by the humble focus of a fellow healer. She nodded. "Hold this retractor. Keep the lung out of my field." For the next 20 minutes, the ER trauma bay transformed into an operating theater, commanded by a ghost. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the celebrated chief of surgery, became a first assistant to the nurse he had belittled just an hour before. He followed her orders without question, his hand steady, his mind reeling. She placed the sutures with an impossible delicacy, her fingers working deep inside the chest cavity. She repaired the tear in the beating heart, a feat of surgical virtuosity that most surgeons would only ever read about. "Suture is in. Bleeding is controlled," she announced, her voice calm. "Let's get him packed and upstairs to the OR. He'll need a full washout and a proper closure. And somebody get a chest tube in him now. It'll actually do some good." She stepped back from the table, pulling off her bloody gloves. Her face, arms, and the front of her scrubs were soaked in Jake Collins's blood. She looked not like a nurse, but like a warrior fresh from battle. The room was silent, save for the steady, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor, the sound of a life saved, the sound of a legend reborn. Evelyn looked at the faces staring at her, the residents, the nurses, the techs. They looked at her as if she had just descended from Mount Olympus. The anonymity she had so carefully cultivated was shattered, blown apart as violently as Jake's chest had been. She finally met Thorne's gaze. He just stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He opened it to speak, then closed it again, shaking his head in disbelief. The doors to the ER swished open, and a team from the operating room arrived to take the patient. As they wheeled Jake away, Thorne turned to Evelyn. The entire ER staff remained, waiting for the inevitable confrontation or explanation. Thorne started, his voice barely a whisper. "I have never, in my 25-year career, seen anything like that. You performed an open-heart procedure in an ER bay with a 10-blade and a prayer." "It wasn't a prayer," Evelyn said, her voice tired. "It was a protocol, just not one of yours." "Who are you?" Thorne asked, the question raw and genuine. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a plea for understanding. Evelyn ran a hand through her hair, smearing blood on her forehead. She looked at the gurney being wheeled toward the elevators, at the soldier she had just pulled back from the brink. The soldier who called her Ghost. There was no hiding anymore. "My name," she said, her voice clear and steady for all to hear, "is Dr. Evelyn Reed, Lieutenant Commander, retired, formerly of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group." A stunned silence fell over the room. DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6. They were phantoms, myths, and this woman, their quiet, unassuming nurse, had been their surgeon. Thorne just stared, finally understanding the impossible skill, the absolute authority. "A ghost," he murmured, echoing the soldier's word. "I was," Evelyn corrected him, her gaze distant. "I'm supposed to be a civilian now." The apology came later that night. After Jake Collins was stabilized in the ICU, his prognosis upgraded from impossible to merely critical. Evelyn had changed into clean scrubs, but she couldn't wash away the feeling of having her past laid bare. She was sitting in the empty cafeteria, staring into a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. Thorne found her there. He didn't approach with his usual swagger. He moved cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal. He pulled up a chair and sat down opposite her, a gesture of deference she never thought possible from him. "Dr. Reed," he began, testing the name. It sounded foreign in the sterile quiet of the hospital. "I owe you an apology. More than an apology. What I said, how I treated you. There's no excuse." Evelyn looked at him. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary humility. "You didn't know," she said. "That's the point," Thorne insisted, leaning forward. "I should have listened. You saw something I didn't. I was blinded by protocol and by my own ego. You tried to tell me, and I threatened to fire you. You saved that man's life in spite of me, not because of me. If you hadn't intervened, he would be dead. I would have killed him with my ignorance." The confession hung in the air between them. It was a raw admission of fallibility from a man who presented himself as infallible. "We all make mistakes," Evelyn said quietly, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She was thinking of her own, the ones that had driven her here. "Not like that," Thorne shook his head. "What you did in there, that wasn't just surgery. That was something else. The speed, the certainty. I've been chief of surgery for a decade. I've seen the best. You're on a different level entirely. Which brings me back to my question. Why? Why are you here, working as a nurse, taking orders from people you could teach circles around?" Evelyn looked down at her hands. They were clean now, but she could still feel the phantom sensation of holding a living heart. "I needed a quiet life," she said. "There's nothing quiet about what you can do," Thorne countered. "A gift like that. You can't just bury it. It's a crime to let that kind of talent go to waste fetching coffee." "It's my choice," she said, a hint of the old steel returning to her voice. "Is it?" he pressed gently. "Or is it a penance? That soldier, Collins, he knew you. He trusted you with his last breath. That's a bond forged in hell. You don't just walk away from that." Before she could answer, a nurse appeared at the cafeteria door. "Dr. Thorne, Dr. Reed, the patient in the ICU is awake, and he's asking for you, Dr. Reed, by name." Evelyn's heart clenched. She had hoped to avoid this, the questions, the memories. But there was no avoiding Jake. She owed him that much. She stood up, Thorne rising with her. "I'll go alone," she said. Thorne nodded, understanding. "His room is under guard," he said. Two very serious-looking men in suits outside his door. They said no one goes in without your approval. Of course, the cleanup crew, the men who erased footprints and silenced whispers. Her old world was bleeding into her new one. The two men in dark suits were exactly as Thorne described. They were agency, not military. Their posture was too relaxed, their eyes too watchful. They recognized her instantly. One of them, a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He's been asking for you." She pushed open the door to the ICU room. Jake Collins was propped up in bed, a constellation of tubes and wires connecting him to the machines that were keeping him alive. His face was cleaner now, and she could see the familiar lines of the young, brash SEAL she had pulled from a burning vehicle in Kandahar 5 years ago. He looked older, harder. "Doc," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Figured I'd find you if I got shot up bad enough." A sad smile touched Evelyn's lips. "Not your best plan, Reaper." "Worked, didn't it?" he countered, then winced as a cough rattled his chest. "Heard you put on quite a show. The arrogant prick in the white coat looks like he's seen a ghost." "That's what you called me," she said, pulling a stool to his bedside. "That's what you are," he replied, his gaze intense. "The ghost of the battlefield. The one who shows up when you're already dead and tells you to get up. We all thought you were gone, Doc, after Operation Nightingale." The name hit her like a physical blow. Operation Nightingale. The black site. The disaster. The night she broke. "I retired," she said, her voice tight. "Retired?" Jake scoffed, then coughed again. "Bullshit. You vanished. Wiped from the records. We asked around. The brass just gave us stone walls. They said you transferred to a research post at Walter Reed. We knew it was a lie. People like you don't do research. You live on the edge of the knife." She looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I couldn't do it anymore, Jake." "Because of Nightingale?" he pressed, his voice softening. "Because of what happened to Spectre and his team?" Spectre. Sergeant First Class Miller. She could still see his face, pale and bloodless under the harsh lights of her makeshift OR. She could still feel the life slipping out of him, no matter what she did. She had blamed herself for his death, for all their deaths. "I failed them," she whispered, the words she had carried like stones in her soul for 2 years. "There was a secondary device. I missed the signs of the internal blast injuries. By the time I realized what was happening—" "Stop," Jake said, his voice firm. He reached out, his hand surprisingly strong, and gripped her arm. "You listen to me, Doc. You didn't fail anyone. That whole op was a setup, a goddamn trap." Evelyn stared at him, her mind reeling. "What are you talking about? The intel was solid." "The intel was a lie," Jake said, his eyes burning with a cold fury. "We were sent in to hit a supposed weapons cache. There were no weapons, just a kill box. The enemy knew our exact insertion point, our numbers, our mission plan. They were waiting for us. The secondary device wasn't random. It was placed to take out the command element and the medical post. It was placed to take out you." Her world tilted on its axis. "No, that's not possible." "It is," Jake insisted. "Spectre. He didn't die on your table, Doctor. He died the second that blast went off. His aorta was shredded. There was nothing anyone could have done. Nothing. I saw his body. You kept him alive for 20 minutes, with nothing but your bare hands and a miracle. You didn't fail him. You gave him time to say goodbye to his wife over the sat phone. Do you understand? You gave him that." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, hot and sharp. For 2 years, she had lived in a prison of her own making, haunted by a failure that, according to Jake, had never been hers. "But the official report," she stammered. "The after-action review blamed the chaotic triage. It implied you were overwhelmed. It was a cover-up," Jake spat. "Command screwed up. Someone high up fed us to the wolves. They couldn't admit there was a traitor in the chain of command, so they buried the truth. They let you take the weight of it. They let you break so they wouldn't have to. Betrayal. It was a colder, Sharper pain than guilt. Guilt was a weight you chose to carry. Betrayal was a knife in your back. "Who?" she asked, her voice a dangerous whisper. "Who sold us out?" "We never found out," Jake said, his grip tightening on her arm. "That's why I was in D.C. I was meeting a source, an intelligence analyst who said he had proof. That's when I got hit. Not a random mugging, Doc. It was a professional hit. They wanted to silence me." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Her disappearance, the cover-up, the attempt on Jake's life. It wasn't over. "The men outside," she said. "They're not here to protect you, are they?" Jake's face was grim. "They're here to contain the situation, and to see what you do next." The door to the ICU room opened without a knock. A man in an impeccably tailored gray suit stepped inside. He was of average height and build, with thinning hair and glasses that gave him a professorial look. But his eyes were like chips of ice. Evelyn knew him instantly. Director Vance, the man from the shadows, her former handler, the one who gave the final green light for Operation Nightingale. "Dr. Reed," Vance said, his voice smooth as polished stone. He smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "It's good to see you again. Though I confess, I preferred your previous anonymity. It was less complicated." "Get out," Evelyn said, standing up to face him. She instinctively moved to place herself between Vance and Jake's bed. Now, Evelyn. "Is that any way to greet an old friend?" he said, his eyes flicking to Jake. "Sergeant Collins, you've been a very difficult man to find, and an even more difficult one to kill, it seems." The casual admission of guilt sent a chill down her spine. "You son of a bitch," Jake rasped from the bed. Vance ignored him, his full attention on Evelyn. "We have a problem, you and I. Your little surgical display in the ER has lit up a dozen watch lists we'd all prefer remained dark. You've made yourself visible again, and that draws attention." "The kind of attention that gets good soldiers killed?" Evelyn shot back, her voice shaking with rage. "You sent them into a trap, Vance. You covered it up and let me think it was my fault." Vance had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Nightingale was a tragedy, a catastrophic intelligence failure. Sacrifices were made. "They weren't sacrificed," Evelyn snarled. "They were murdered. And you wrote the report that buried the truth." "I did what was necessary to protect the integrity of the program," Vance said coolly. "Admitting a breach of that magnitude would have compromised operations on a global scale. Your self-imposed exile was a convenient, if regrettable, piece of that." Convenient. He had shattered her life, her identity, her very soul, and called it convenient. "And now?" she asked. "Why are you here? To finish the job you started with Jake?" "On the contrary," Vance said, taking a step closer. "I'm here to offer you a way back in. The man Jake was meeting, he wasn't just an analyst. He was part of a splinter faction within the agency. They're the ones who sold out Nightingale. They're planning something else, something much bigger. We've been hunting them for 2 years. We need your help, Evelyn." He was trying to recruit her, to use her sense of duty, the very quality he had exploited to break her. "You want me to be your ghost again?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "To clean up your mess? To work for the very system that betrayed me?" "I want you to help me find the people who killed your men," he corrected, his voice a silken trap. "I'm offering you justice, a chance to make it right. Come back to us. We'll give you a new identity, a state-of-the-art mobile surgical unit, anything you want. All we ask is that you do what only you can do when the time comes." This was the choice. Disappear back into the shadows with the devil she knew, or stay here, in the light, and fight a different kind of war. For 2 years, she had been running. Now, she was being offered a chance to run back. She thought of the condescension from Thorne, the whispers of the residents, She thought of the quiet, anonymous life she had tried to build. And she thought of the feeling of Jake's heart beating under her fingers, the feeling of purpose. "What if I say no?" she asked. Vance's smile vanished. "Anonymity is a privilege, Doctor. One you no longer have. The people who want Sergeant Collins dead now know he is here. They also know that the ghost surgeon who can perform miracles is here with him. This hospital, everyone in it. They've just become a target. If you walk away, you're not just walking away from me. You're walking away from them." It was a threat, cloaked as a choice. Join him, or watch innocent people get caught in the crossfire. The door opened again. This time it was Dr. Thorne. He took in the scene. The man in the suit, Evelyn's rigid posture, the tension thick enough to cut. "Is there a problem here?" Thorne asked, his voice calm but firm. He walked over to stand beside Evelyn, a silent, solid statement of allegiance. Vance sized Thorne up, dismissing him as a civilian. "This is a private conversation, Doctor." "This is my hospital," Thorne countered, his voice like granite. "And this is Dr. Reed, a member of my staff. Which means her problems are my problems. So I ask again, is there a problem?" Evelyn looked at Thorne, at the man who had been her tormentor and was now her staunchest defender. And in that moment, she saw a different path forward. Not running back to the shadows, not hiding in the light, but commanding the light. She turned back to Vance, her decision made. "No," she said. Vance raised an eyebrow. "No?" "No," she repeated, her voice ringing with newfound certainty. "I'm not going back with you. I'm done being a ghost. I'm done cleaning up your messes and hiding from your mistakes. You want the people who did this? Find them yourself. My work is here now." Vance's face hardened. "You're making a grave mistake, Evelyn. You can't protect them." "Watch me," she said. She looked at Thorne. "I need you to lock down this hospital. Now. No one in or out without my authorization. I want security on every floor. And I want this man and his associates escorted off the premises." Thorne didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone. "This is Thorne. Initiate a code Silver. Full facility lockdown. I want hospital security to escort 3 unidentified males from the ICU wing. They are to be considered hostile." Vance looked from Evelyn's defiant face to Thorne's unwavering support. He was a man used to getting his way through intimidation and manipulation. But here, in this sterile, brightly lit room, his power was useless. He had lost control. "This isn't over, Reed," he hissed, his composure finally cracking. He turned and swept out of the room, his 2 agents following like shadows. The immediate threat was gone, but Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. She had made an enemy of a very powerful man. "Are you sure about this?" Thorne asked, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied. She looked at Jake, who was watching her with pride in his eyes. "I'm done running." The next morning, Evelyn was summoned to the hospital administrator's boardroom. She expected a reprimand, perhaps even termination for the chaos she had caused. Instead, she found the entire board of directors, along with a deeply serious Marcus Thorne. "Dr. Reed," the chairman, a stern-looking man named Henderson, began. "Dr. Thorne has given us a full report of yesterday's events, both the unconventional medical intervention and the subsequent security incident." Evelyn stood tall, ready for the fallout. "I did what was necessary to save my patient's life." "So we've gathered," Henderson said, a faint smile on his face. He also gave us this. He slid a folder across the polished table. It was a proposal, written and submitted by Thorne overnight. Evelyn opened it. The title read, "Proposal for the Metropolitan General Center for Advanced Trauma and Combat Veteran Care." The proposal was a detailed, impassioned argument for the creation of a new department, one dedicated to treating the unique and complex injuries of soldiers returning from combat. It cited the growing need for specialists who understood blast trauma, advanced prosthetics, and the psychological wounds of war. At the end of the proposal was a section on leadership. It recommended one name for the position of director: Dr. Evelyn Reed. She looked up, stunned, at Thorne. He met her gaze and nodded. "The world has changed," Thorne said to the board. "Medicine has to change with it. We can't keep applying civilian protocols to battlefield injuries and expect the best outcomes. What Dr. Reed did yesterday wasn't just a miracle, it was a lesson. She possesses a unique, invaluable skill set that we are criminally underutilizing. We shouldn't be hiding that talent. We should be building a program around it." Henderson leaned forward. "Dr. Reed, we understand you have a complicated past, and that accepting a public-facing role like this might bring unwanted attention." "It will," Evelyn said honestly. "There are dangerous people who would prefer I remained a ghost." "Let them come," Thorne said with a fierce loyalty that moved her deeply. "This hospital will stand with you. We protect our own." The board members murmured in agreement. Evelyn looked at the proposal, at the offer of a new beginning. It wasn't just a job. It was a purpose, a chance to use her skills not in the shadows, but in the light. A chance to heal the very soldiers the system had betrayed, just as it had betrayed her. It was a chance to build something that would last. A legacy. She closed the folder. "I accept." 6 months later, the Center for Advanced Trauma was a reality. It was a state-of-the-art facility, funded by a combination of hospital funds and grateful military donors, a network Jake Collins had quietly activated. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood in the middle of her new domain. It was a hybrid of a civilian OR and a military-forward surgical unit, designed to her exact specifications. She wore crisp, clean surgical scrubs, a stethoscope around her neck, and her name, Dr. E. Reed, Director of Trauma, embroidered over her heart. Her team, a hand-picked group of the hospital's best and brightest, including a now humbled and deeply respectful Marcus Thorne as her deputy, was gathered around a holographic display, reviewing a complex case. "The fragmentation is deep," Evelyn said, pointing to the 3D model of a patient's spine. "It's resting against the dura. Standard approach is too risky. We could sever the cord. We're going to have to go in laterally, using a retroperitoneal approach. It's a technique we developed in the field for extracting shrapnel near the spine." She was teaching, leading, inspiring. She was no longer hiding her knowledge. She was sharing it, forging a new generation of surgeons who understood both worlds. Her phone buzzed. It was a secure line. The caller ID was just a single letter. J. "Go for Reed," she answered. "Hey, Doc," Jake's voice came through, strong and healthy. He had made a full recovery and was now working with a congressional oversight committee to expose the corruption Vance had tried to hide. "Got another one for you. Marine, hit by an RPG in Syria. They're flying him in now. Local surgeons say he's inoperable." Evelyn looked at her team, who were watching her, ready. She looked around at the center she had built, a sanctuary of healing born from the ashes of her past. A genuine smile spread across her face, bright and full of life. The ghosts were still there, but they no longer haunted her. They stood beside her, a silent honor guard. I was a ghost, built to fade into the background. I was a weapon, meant to be hidden away until needed. But a surgeon's hands are meant to heal in the light, not just patch wounds in the dark. I ran from who I was, and in doing so, I nearly lost myself. Now I know. My past is not a burden to be hidden. It is a foundation to be built upon. I am not a ghost anymore. I am an anchor. Tell them to come home, she said into the phone, her voice ringing with purpose. My team is ready. She ended the call and looked at the waiting faces of her staff. All right, people, she said, her voice filled with the calm, unshakable authority of a leader who had finally found her place. Let's go to work.